In this video, we're going to study the files and exceptions in Python. So the objectives of this lecture is about to know the how do we read from the text files and write from the text files, and when if we need to open the files, we should test if it is actually exists, and we will be able to read and write more complex data with files. Use the Pickle module, and we also will handle errors by using the exceptions. So let's first talking about the plain text file, which is the text file. What is called a plain text file? It's actually a file made up of only ASCII characters. What are the ASCII characters? It's pretty much whatever you have on the keyboard. So how do we save them, right? So it's actually easy to read the string from the plain text files, and when we read, we actually treat the whole reading process as row by row. So one line by one line after one line. The text files are good choices for some simple information because there are some benefits. It's easy to edit. It's cross-platform. Almost all the operating system or almost all the systems support text file, and it's human readable. It's we can inspect the value in the file directly. So let's first talk about how do we open and close a text file. To open a text file, you will need actually a function called open, and then you will need the first argument as the file name. Normally, this file name ideally should be the full path of the file, and then you have the mode, access mode. So in this case, we're doing R. R means reading. We're going to read the file, and then after this open is done, it's supposed to return a file object. This file object is we suppose save them, refer the file object by using a variable. So this will be our file object. So then once it's opened, then we can read and write. So every time when we open one, we have to close one. To close, it's much easier. You can simply just use the file object dot close. So that's a method of the close. The next one is the file access mode. Earlier here, this is the access mode. We actually have several access mode. So the R indicated it's just a purely reading. We're not going to write back to the file. However, W means we're going to write to the file. A means we're going to append to the file. So what does mean is we actually add new content to the end of the existing file. And then R plus means read from or write to a file. So that means we're going to pretty much do we can read and write. If the file does not exist, we're gonna the Python will complain an error, so it has to be exists. Well, W plus it's read and write from a file. If the file does not if the file does not exist, then we create one. And plus, we're going to read and write from beginning. So if there are content before, we're going to rewrite. We're going to delete all the existing content and write from the beginning. Well, A plus means we're going to append and read the file. If the file exists, then new data will be actually added to the file. If the file does not exist, we're going to create one. So it really depends on your application, then you're gonna decide which access mode is gonna be used. So basically, these two, W plus and A plus, the differences of these two is only if you want the new content be adding to the existing one, then you're gonna use append plus, A plus. If you just want to write every time from the beginning, then you gotta use W plus. So how do we actually read a file? When we read a file, we can actually specify, we can read the entire file, all the content, like the whole thing. We can just simply put a parenthesis. If we just read from the first five characters, then we just put a certain characters. If we just read one character, then we put an integer in there as one character, one letter. Read file object methods has arguments and return value. The return value must be a string. So even you save some integer, some numbers in it, it still be read as a string. You will have to convert it to a integer. And each read begins where the last end. So there is actually a marker to indicate where was the last read was. At the end of the file, the read will return the empty string, right? So if the marker happens to be the end of the file, the read will actually return an empty string. So we can also read a line. We can read one line by line. So we can just call one time, it's line 1, call the second time, line 2, and call the third time, line 3. What it does is once they read the line, they put a marker to the next line. So the read line will return the entire line of the file if no value passed. Once read all the characters in the line, the next line will be the current line. So, and you can actually specify how many characters in that line will be read. It's a little bit confusing. So normally people just read the entire line and then parse the line accordingly. We can actually read the lines. We can read all the lines into a list. The line it's gonna be a list. So that means we don't have to repeatedly do this lines. We read all the lines as lines. Therefore, it's a list. So we can then operate the list. Read lines file will read the text into the list and return a list of strings. Each line becomes one element in the list. It's all string. Well, compared to the read actually reads the entire file into one big string. While here you actually break down into multiple strings, and those strings will be saved into a list. You can actually loop through the a text file by simply just first have a file object, and then you have a for 9 in text file. This will actually give you every single line, so you don't have to write text file dot read line. It will directly loop through every single line. It can iterate the entire line, the entire file, and each time is one line, one time. The two more useful string methods will be the strip and the split. The split basically will basically cut the string by using some characters to split the files. So suppose if you have something like this, right? If you have some in a 9, if you have something like less than and greater than as the separator, then you can use this as a separator to split the whole string. So that means you're going to cut. So cut right here, that will make you 1. And then cut right here, it will make you 2 and 3. So eventually it's going to return a list that only include the 1, 2, and 3. Well, strips, the strips will return a copy of the string with the leading and the tailing characters removed. So all the white space will be removed. Normally all the table keys will be removed. Strip basically will remove all the extra white spaces. Okay, all the extra white spaces. So that will be very useful when we are actually doing this this kind of processing of the strings. So strip and split will be the often used. When we write a file, we can actually simply call the method called the write. The write will write one line to the file. The write actually will treat everything as a string. So if you have a change 9, a new 9, it will actually add and switch the cursor in the file to the new 9. If you don't have anything, it will keep on writing. It will keep on writing the content. So otherwise, you can also write lines. If you have lists, you can directly write lines, just like the read lines. The picking and pickling and unpickling data to or from a file, you can import a module. It's called the cpickle. Then you can actually use the cpickle to actually store the complex objects such as lists, dictionaries into files. So in this case, we have a lists. We can directly dump the lists to the file. We can directly dump the list to the file. Same thing if we have the file object, we can load the variety into the into a list. This is the very useful and very easy. So it's save you a lot of time. And using a shelf to store or get pickled data. The shelf is actually an object written to a file that acts like a dictionary, provide random access to a group of objects. So you can just import shelf, and then you can have shelf.open, and then you can have pickled to data, and that will give you pickles. And then pickles you can have variety, and then it will give you all the content. Then you can use the sync shelf forces change to all the changes to be updated to the file. So it's like something like this for keys in pickle keys, and you are going to have print the key and dash pickles key, and that will give you the value of that particular keys. The shelf acts as a dictionary, can retrieve pickle objects through the keys. Okay, so those are the modules that you probably can use. And the next one is handling exception. The exception will be annoying when we have something like one is divided by 0. So we can actually trace back the arrows. So that will actually terminate our execution of the program. So one of the good ways to do is actually add exception. So the program will not be terminated. You can still stay, the program will not crash. Okay. When the exception is raised, it can be caught or trapped, and then can be handled correctly without interrupt the program, without crashing the program. So we can use the try exception, and if you want to print out the exceptions, you can add a variable. Let's say add e, then print here. You can print something go wrong, and the dot, then plus the a e dot message. That will give you what's the error message is, so you can actually see it. The try statement actually put the piece of code that is possibly give you errors, you can put there, and then the exception part will actually trap all the exceptions, and then here print something wrong is actually the handling of the exception. If no exception raised, the exception, if this step went goes through successfully without any problems, the exception part will be actually skipped. So how do we specify a particular exception type? We can actually write a particular exception. Suppose I know that this is a possible, we're going to have value arrow exception, then I can just put a parenthesis. So this kind of like a filtering the arrows. So we can say, okay, print that is not a number, and then this actually will help us to precisely handle a certain type of arrows. There are some common exception types. The first one is I/O arrows. That means it's input/output arrows. It could be just some read mode. For example, you are trying to read a file, however, the file does not exist. Or index arrow, sometimes is out of the range, right? Or key arrow, name arrow, syntax arrow, type arrow, value arrow, zero division arrow, and so on. There are so many different arrows. Those are just examples of common ones. The handling multiple exceptions, you can actually put multiple exception arrows right there, and as a filter you can put those there. It can trap all those exceptions. Okay, but it's better just to use individual filter, so in that way you can handle the error correctly because sometimes you need to know what type of error is, then you handle correctly accordingly. So you can put two exceptions, so kind of like break down this exception arrows into two exceptions, right? And get an exception arguments. So sometimes we want to know what's actually the error message is. So you can actually put a comma and then e, and then you can actually get that. So this will be, for example, in this case, you get actually the e. It will print out the e as well, and a lot of times you can add a try exception, except and else. Try except else. The else clause actually will be executed only if no exception is raised. So if there's no exception is raised, this will be this else part will be executed. And as a summary, in this video, we actually showed you how do we handle the files. So how do we open a file? We can use open methods, and we can use open functions, and we can return a file object. The arguments will be file name and mode. This is access mode. There are different ones. They have R, W, R plus, W plus, and A plus, and also A. So each of them means differently, right? And how do you close a file? You simply use the file object dot close. So whenever you open a file, you will always remember to close the file. Otherwise, you are using the file resources because those are limited. You only have, in the old days, there only have 10, 24 file objects. Depends on the operating system. How do you read all the characters from a line in a file? You can simply just use file.readLine. That will read one line, and you can read all the lines and return a list. You can also go through the whole loop by simply use for a line in a file. This file is actually a file object. How do you write a text file to a file? You can simply just use write. And how do you write a list to the file? You can use write lines. And then how do you do the exception in the Python? You can, what is the exception in the file? It's actually an error that occurs during the runtime of the program. And how do you actually select a section of the code that reads an exception? You can use try except, then parentheses a particular exception with else clause. So this is the way you can handle the errors without crash the program. If an exception has an argument, what does it usually contain? Normally it contains a message describe the exception, and so we can know what's the message, what's the error is. Within a try block, how can you execute the code if no exception is raised? It's in the else clause, right? So try some code. If there is exception, that will be handled in the exception clause. Otherwise, if the code execute correctly, then it will go through the else clause. So since all those files, a lot of times you want to do before you use it, you need to check if the files are actually exists. Therefore, you a lot of times you're going to use OS module to provide functions for before you actually handle the files. So OS is a model. So you will first import the OS, and then you can use OS get CWD. CWD is the current working directory. So get the current working directory. Make sure you are in the right folder, and then you have os.change directory. So chdir, that's change directory, and then you have os.path.exists. So if you have a path, you want to check if that path exists, then you can actually use the os.path.exists, or you can check if the file exists. You can check os.path.isFile. So the test.txt will be returning a true if it is a file, otherwise it will return false. And os.listdir, that will give you a list of the files in the current directory, and those are the operating system functions for you. And sys is the system specific parameters. So like sys.grep argv. This is actually the list of command line arguments passed through the Python script. So if you are writing a script and if you want to enter some parameters, and when people actually type your command, they enter some values that will be arguments. So here it's actually get a list of arguments, and then you can use some exit of argument. You can exit from the Python. You can exit from the Python. It means terminate your Python program. You can use system.exit. Exit. The last part is about the web crawler. Just in case if you want to grab something from the web, you can use URL lab. URL lab, then URL retrieve, and then you just give the link of the website, and then you will get the HTML document. Then you can process the document accordingly. Just in case in the future, if you need to do something like grab some information from a particular example. For example, if you want to find what's the key analysis value of a stock market for a particular stock symbols, let's say Apple or Tesla, then you can use this URL retrieve to retrieve that Yahoo page and save as tesla.html. Then you can pass that HTML and retrieve all the important information, and then that will be able to do it. Okay, that's the lecture part of this session.